First off, it's a pleasure to be speaking to everyone tonight. And before anything else, I want to say thank you to the yeshiva. I want to say thank you to Rav Berman, especially for organizing all of this. 20 years is no small thing for Eretz Tzvi. Really a big deal to reach the 20-year mark. And Mirza Hashem, with God's help, the yeshiva will continue to go Michael Chayil and have many more years of inspiring future generations of Jewish leadership and Talmidei Chachamim. So that being said, I want to tell a bit of a story of how I came up with this shir and then jump into it. So I remember very vividly having this exact conversation with Rav Tabori Shlita during my Shana Bet when we learned Psachim in the yeshiva, and we had a long conversation about the issue of Tosefes Yom Tov and Tosefes Shabbos, the idea of adding on two Shabbos and two Yom Tov from the Chol, from the weekday, which is why we start Shabbos earlier than the exact Shkia, than the exact sunset, and why we also go a bit later than the exact Shkia. We go until Tzeis HaKochavim, until nightfall. And the same thing does apply to Yom Tov as well. We start Yom Tov before the exact time that it is supposed to begin, which is really Shkia. And Rav Aviad kept on prodding me on this and kept asking me to think of a specific nafkamina, a specific halachic difference that comes up in the context of Shavuos that does not apply in the case of other Yamim Tovim. And I guess I hadn't had my coffee that day, so Rav Aviad kept pushing me, and I was sitting there and I couldn't think of it. And then eventually Rav Aviad just told me what it was, and he told me, this is one you need to remember. This is one that one day, you'll give a shir on or something. So that was, I guess, the impetus for giving a shir specifically on the issue of, can you start Shavuos early? Can you bring in the holiday of Shavuos early? And what would make Shavuos different from Shabbos and different than all other Yamim Tovim? So let me pull up the Makoros and we will jump right into it. So our first Makor is Pasuk from Vayikra tells us about the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer, Svartem Lachem Mirachas HaShabbos, V'yom Haviyachem Es HaOmer HaTnufa, Sheva Shabbosos Tmimos Tiena. That from the day after Pesach, which is the Shabbos in context, we're not talking about an actual Shabbos, we're talking about the Yom Tov of Pesach, we have the mitzvah to bring the Korban HaOmer, and from that point we start counting 7 Shabbosos Tmimos, 7 weeks Tmimos. And notice I'm going to not translate the word Tmimos on purpose, in as much as we will see how it's a somewhat ambiguous word that will then lead us in a variety of different directions. Then the next pasuk tells us, Ad Macharas HaShabbos, Ad Macharas HaShabbos HaShvis, Tisperu Chamishim Yom, Yikrafta Mincha Chadasha L'Hashem. That until after, from that day forward, you will count 50 days, the 50th day being Shavuos, and on that 50th day, you will give a sacrifice to Hashem. So the question that arises is the one word in that context, that in those two psukim that we may not understand fully, is the concept of Tmimos. The word Tamim comes up in any number of different contexts throughout Tanakh. Tamim, we talk about a korban being Tamim, perhaps meaning perfect, whole, something of this sort, not blemished. So what does Tamimos, mean in the context of a week of Sfiras HaOmer? So the Targum Yonasan explains the pasuk and go to the end of the pasuk where he says that the Amusa Sheva Shvuyin Shleimin Yahweh, that the word Tamim, according to the Targum, is the word Shalem, Shleimin. You need to count 7 complete weeks. That is the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer. That the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer is to count all 7 complete weeks. And in order to understand that further, Rashi tells us that the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer is to count 49 days, and you don't count the 50th day. The 50th day is Shavuos. But when it says Tisbru Chamishim Yom, you're counting up until the 50th day, not including the 50th day. So from this point, we understand that the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer is to count 49 complete days, 7 complete weeks, and then on the 50th day is Shavuos. So the question that arises is what happens if I bring in Shavuos early? If on this year it's Tuesday night, if on Tuesday night at 6 o'clock p.m. or 7 o'clock p.m., where the sun has not gone down yet and it has not become night, I declare it to, I bring in the holiday of Shavuos. Well, then, ostensibly, that would mean that I've not fulfilled the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer in its entirety, because I've cut off that 49th day. That you have to allow the 49 days to complete themselves, even when there is no 50th day to count. And this is exactly what the Taz in Orach Chaim Siman Taf Tzadi Daled tells us. That the Taz, the commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, tells us that we have to wait to daven Mariv until after the holiday has actually begun, after Tzeis HaKochavim, after nightfall, because if we do it earlier, we will not have the concept of Timimos for Sfiras HaOmer. We will have cut off that 49th day prematurely, and that would be against the mitzvah, that would be in violation of the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer. You will not have completed the mitzvah of counting 49 complete days. So seemingly, if we held directly like the Taz, there would be no question that you cannot make early Yom Tov on Shavuos because you need to have 49 complete days. Before we get into the tshuva of Rav Ovadia and tshuvas from other poskim that seem to have differing opinions, it's interesting to note this idea that you have to complete the 49th day of Sfiras HaOmer, and that even though you might be in such a rush to bring in Shavuos, and that there's a more machshavadik idea here that you may be wanting to bring in Shavuos early because you're very excited Shavuos. No, you have to let the process of Sfiras HaOmer take its course, and you have to complete this mitzvah before you can move on to the mitzvah of Shavuos. So something just to think of, perhaps more broadly in the context of mitzvahs, that you have to complete every mitzvah to its fullest before you can then move on to the next mitzvah. So Rav Ovadia Yosef Zatzal was asked this very question about whether you can bring in you can bring in the holiday of Shavuos early. And as we know from Rav Ovadia very much often tries to be makil in situations such as these, where there may be other human issues at play, issues to do with the suffering of humans, and we'll see which issues he's talking about. And we'll see how he approaches this issue. So it's interesting to know just at the beginning of the tshuva from Rav Ovadia, Rav Ovadia quotes a sefer called Emek Bracha, which is written by, I believe, the father of the Shla being the author of the Shnei Luchos Habris, which is also relevant to this time of year. People have the minhag to say a special tefillah written by the Shla on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. So the father of the Shla brings down in the Sefer Emek Bracha that he heard from various other Rabbanim. I'm not going to go into all of them, but he lists them at the beginning of this tshuva. Shelo lasos kiddush al kos belayla rishon shalchak hashvus ad lachar tes hakochavim meisha sfiras haomer Nemar Sheva Shabbasos Tmiros Tiana Kshu Makadesh Mibod Yom Harehu Mechaser Oso Mikzas Ma'arbim Batesha Yimei Sfira. You're cutting off that little tiny bit at the end of Sfira and you cannot do that. You have to wait to make Kiddush and accept Yom Tov until after Tzesa Kochavim, until after nightfall. And this seems to be the dominant halachic position through the Taz. But Rav Ovadia brings another opinion. And he says that he brings in another opinion that there were very pious Rabbanim, which he used the language that he used, that that people who stay up all the night of Shavuos, which is the minhag, and for people who heard Rav Berman's shiur earlier, we know that this is a Kabbalistically based minhag, to stay up the entire night of Shavuos and to stay up learning Torah the entire night of Shavuos, that there are these people who stay up the entire night of Shavuos, as we say in the Zohar, that this is the minhag, and they learn a certain set limud of, Torah on the night of Shavuos. That Rav Ovadia is addressing this part of his tshuva to people who live in northern climates, people who live in northern Europe. And if anybody, just does a Google search, they will see that the sun doesn't go down in, let's say, Berlin until about 10 p.m. this time of year. And the stars don't come out. It doesn't officially become Tzesa Kochavim, doesn't officially become the next day until about 11 o'clock or so. So you can imagine a situation where someone would have to wait until about 11 p.m. or so to start their Yom Tov meal and to daven Ma'ariv and to start the Suda for Yom Tov, and that would be placing a very large burden on these people who live in these climates. And it's not much better, even places a little bit south, places like Poland, that anywhere in Europe at this time of year, pretty much, even England, it will not become dark until very, very late at night. So for people who are planning to stay up the entire night, this creates a very big burden. If they will wait until after nightfall to start eating their Yom Tov meal, so that he says that if you're going to if they start dinner at 11 o'clock, it'll be 2 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the morning by the time they finish dinner, and these people are planning to stay awake the entire night anyways, and they want to learn. These people want to learn. They want to be awake the entire night to learn, and they don't want to have to start eating at 11 and then have less time to learn. So Rav Ovadia says in this case, so bein hashmashos is this halachically ambiguous time between when the sun is no longer visible, shkia has passed, sunset has passed, and when the stars come out, and we know that with a sense of certainty that it is now night, and therefore the next halachic day. So bein hashmashos is this in-between time. I guess you might call it twilight in English. But that, according to Rav Ovadia, one can make Kiddush and begin eating a Yom Tov meal. Make Kiddush and begin eating a meal during this time, because according to him, Kimidaraisa ben hashmashos nikra laila, that on a Torah level, that purely going based on the Torah without any of Chazal, without any later rabbinic writing, that according to the Torah, the Ben Shkia marks the end of the day, and Ben Hashmashos is definitely the nighttime according to the Torah, and therefore one could begin the Yom Tov meal. Well, begin the Yom Tov meal during this twilight period. It's interesting to note also that Rabbi Ovadia seems to hold that in our current time, without a Beis Hamikdash or without any korbanos, that the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer is only d'Rabbanan anyways. So you could perhaps say that in this case, where you're only worried about a perhaps cutting off the tail end of a mitzvah that is d'Rabbanan, that is rabbinic in nature, you may not have to be so worried about starting your Yom Tov meal early, especially in the case where we know a halachic principle that in cases where it will cause you anguish, b'makom tsar lo gazru be'Rabbanan, that in cases where your personal anguish is at stake and that you may become very upset or you may be hurt by it, you might be able to be lenient and start early because you're only worried about a mitzvah d'Rabbanan here and not a Torah obligation to count the 49 days of the Omer. The next two sources are from a sefer called Mekadesh Yisrael from Rav Yisrael David Harfanis, which he's a Satmar Dayan in Williamsburg. And he deals with two kind of offshoot questions from this question. And he deals with the same question that we just dealt with, that if someone is old or they have a hard time eating late at night, it's not, they may have some medical reason why they can't eat so late at night and they have to eat earlier. If you're allowed to daven Maariv for Shavuos earlier and eat earlier, eat the Yom Tov meal earlier, and bring in the Yom Tov earlier. And he says, black on white, that in bold letters, it's mutarim, you're allowed to do this. That in the case of someone who's ill or old, and we treat generally in halacha, we treat people who are old as if they have some sort of medical condition just by default, that you're allowed to bring the Yom Tov in early. And then, so he says black on white that for many people, you would be allowed to bring in the Yom Tov of Shavuos early. The last question I want to deal with before I get into one final idea, more on a machshava lens to bring us into Shavuos, is Rav Harfanis deals with the question about women and this issue. That we know that women are not chayiv in Sfiras HaOmer anyways, because it is a mitzvah says ban grama. It is a time-bound mitzvah to count Sfiras HaOmer. There's a definite time for counting Sfiras HaOmer. So we know that women are not obligated to count Sfiras HaOmer anyways. And he goes through a lot of sources. I'm not going to go through all of it, whether or not a woman would be allowed to start early because she's not chayiv in Sfiras HaOmer anyways. And he seems to say here that a woman is actually not allowed to start earlier. Shigam nashim tzrichos lamtin Yisrael l'kadesh ad lachar zman tzes hakohavim l'chag ateres nitzcha mechila ma'achar kalos sheva shabbos tos mechag haPesach. That he says here, based on a tshuva in Laharos Nasan, that the Yom Tov of Shavuos is not based on you counting Sfiras HaOmer. It's based on being 50 days, 49. It's based on being after the Sfiras HaOmer on the 50th day after Pesach. So the fact that this individual woman is not obligated to count Sfiras HaOmer has no bearing on the fact that if she brings in Yom Tov early, it's not Shavuos. It's not she bringing in Yom Tov early. It would not be Shavuos, and therefore she would not be allowed to start Yom Tov early. So the general practice, I believe, as we practice it, is not to start Yom Tov on Shavuos early. But it's interesting to know that there are those poskim who are makil and do not forbid the practice entirely. before I close, before I sign off, I just want to bring in a report that I heard in saw in a sefer from the Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Yoeli, um, who talks about the idea of Sfiras HaOmer, and he says that you can imagine this person going through a process of counting the 49 days till Shavuos, and every day he counts again, he keeps counting, and eventually the Sfiras, we think the Sfiras HaOmer would be sort of a pump up for Shavuos, where every day you think you're getting closer to the day where Hashem's going to give you the Torah on Shavuos. But he said that Sfiras Omer can have the opposite effect on a person, that every day you have this mitzvah of Sfiras Omer that you have to worry about, you have to make sure to count. There's all these halachas for counting Sfiras Omer, and you might think that by the time you get to Shavuos, you're kind of tired from this entire almost 2 months that you've been counting till Shavuos. And Rav Teitelbaum, Rav Yoel, talks about this idea, and he says that you have to that you get to that 49th day, you might be very worn out, and that is why the Torah says specifically, and I'll go back to the pasuk, that on Shavuos you have to give a mincha chadasha l'Hashem, you have to give a new korban l'Hashem, and that every day, and that despite whatever you went through in Sfiras Omer and this tiring process of counting Sfiras Omer, Shavuos is a time of renewal, and that Shavuos is the time where you accept the Torah for yourself all over again after this very long, intensive process. And with that, I just want to say thank you again to Rav Berman and all the other Rosh Yeshiva and all the Ramim of the yeshiva. I had a fantastic 2 years in Eretz Tzvi, and it's truly an honor to get to participate in an event like this on behalf of the yeshiva. And I wish everyone Good Yom Tov, Chag Sameach. And please, if you can, contribute to the yeshiva's fundraising campaign so that they can continue to do the amazing things that they do.